All right, Dan, so it is setting up to be a very wild year in terms of the coaching carousel in college football. Thought maybe today we'd take a little bit of time to rank the openings among Power 5 teams. At time of recording, here are the jobs that are open. LSU, TCU, USC, Virginia Tech, Washington, and Washington State. Texas Tech was open, but they named Joey McGuire their head football coach a short while ago. Yep. So, with that being said, with those 6 openings to discuss, Dan, which are your favorites? Which are your not-so-favorites?
Oh, well, I'd be remiss if I didn't remind people to subscribe to the YouTube channel and hit that little bell to be alerted. But other than that, I think LSU, to me, is narrowly the best job, though the word best means whatever you want it to mean. It's a completely subjective descriptor. I think USC is crazy interesting with a high ceiling, but I think it's a different job than what it was under Pete Carroll because of the way recruiting and conference alignments have changed. Washington, I think, is a good job, but a tricky job. Washington State is a very specific job. TCU, though, is another one of those jobs. When you look at how the sport is changing and what the Big 12 is going to look like, I think probably sooner rather than later, that job becomes interesting because it might be a good marriage of expectations, available talent, ceiling kind of thing. So right now, I have it at LSU 1 because at the end of the day, it's all recruiting, and LSU has the best chance to build the biggest, best, deepest roster to make money winning championships or going to the playoff or going to the SEC championship or going to big bowls and all that stuff, and also attract great coaches and also pay off coaches who don't work out to leave and not be sustained in mediocrity. So right now I have it at as LSU, but I understand that it's going to come with certain pressures that you could just be fired in 2 or 3 years. What do you think?
Well, I agree. LSU, I think, has to be top of the totem pole here. That is where this conversation starts. Again, at time of recording, there have been all sorts of wild rumors about who might be interested in that job. We've been hearing for months now about how LSU's AD likes to make a splash. And though some of the early conjecture was around Jimbo Fisher, there have been rumors now about the likes of Lincoln Riley, who perhaps will be looking to move elsewhere from Oklahoma.
I saw Matt Campbell's name came up again.
Campbell, right. I mean, this is that caliber of job that can attract some of those names that have become household names in the college football coaching industry. So I think for that and that alone, the fact that it's got that kind of star power, the fact that it plays in the SEC West, the fact that they're ready, willing, and able to make whatever commitment on the financial side is necessary to accelerate the football program. That, I think, makes it a very, very attractive spot to be. LSU has to be number 1. Where it gets interesting for me, though, is when we start talking about number 2. And TCU, I think, is very interesting for many of the reasons I just described, because the college football world is changing, especially as it relates to the Big 12. TCU, I mean, is it the best job available in the Big 12, in all of the Big 12, in the new version of the Big 12 when Texas and Oklahoma bolt for the SEC? You could certainly make that case. The facilities are top notch. This is a program that Gary Patterson, he's got the statue out front. He has taken through 3 conferences now to get to the point where they're finally a Power 5 institution. They're in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, which is very rich from a recruiting standpoint. TCU brings a lot to the table if you are a head football coach looking for perhaps a new destination that could set you up to win a national championship or at least win a conference championship at the Power 5 level.
Yeah, no, TCU is an interesting job of where expectations and realities sort of merge. The USC job is interesting to me because a lot of people look at that job and say, look how much talent is in USC's backyard. And while it's true, there's more talent at, in the greater LA area in Southern California than, say, New Mexico or Tulsa or Minneapolis or something like that, it's not where it was in the early 2000s. And we've talked to recruiting people that say the talent in Southern California has spread out to Arizona, to Washington, to Utah, to Colorado. As people have moved away and as football has become less popular in Southern California, the talent is just not there, especially along the lines. That's the big thing. Along the offensive and defensive lines, you have to travel. And Pete Carroll was that kind of personality who did travel, who went to Florida, who went to New Jersey to get big humans that set up the foundation for what USC was able to do with that sustained success. The thing that's interesting to me is a place like TCU has had exactly one good coach ever, okay? TCU has had one good coach in the history of the program, and Gary Patterson was magnificent and took them to a Rose Bowl, took them to the verge of the playoff. But it's one of those things where, is the university committed like some of the other big places that we're mentioning? And you can ask that about USC as well. There's no question it exists with LSU. There's no question about the commitment from a financial perspective, from a people perspective, from a booster perspective, that LSU is ahead of everybody on this list. And Virginia Tech, I'd file under the same category as TCU in that there's a willingness to win. There is an investment on a certain level to win, but it's hard to classify Virginia Tech or TCU as a big time place. Like on another level, I know I keep saying this, it's hard to look at anything that happened prior to 2010 and say that is a reference point that we should consider.
No.
Because the sport changes so quickly. The way it's aligned, the way recruiting has worked, the way games are won, the way that coaches are hired and fired, it's bordering on irrelevant, something that happened in 2004, 2008, whatever. So I still think the upside of places like USC and TCU are interesting. And if I were USC, the priority number one is you hire somebody with a broad national appeal from a recruiting standpoint who can also recruit the administration to spend a ton of cash.
Yeah, and that I think is going to
boosters,
be key in order to turn USC around. Yeah. So we've got LSU at number one. I think we're in agreement there.
Yeah.
I think it's a 3-horse race, to be honest, for that number 2 spot between USC, between TCU, and between Washington. A job that just opened up with Jimmy Lake being dismissed. Washington, again, in Seattle, has a fervent fan base, has a rich tradition. Chris Petersen was there just a few short years ago and started building up this program into what we thought Jimmy Lake would continue it as, but it just did not materialize.
A playoff program, by the way. We don't say that about USC or TCU. Washington has been to the playoff.
It's a premier job on the West Coast. Mm-hmm. So I think that is what we're looking at. I would be inclined to put USC number 2.
Yeah, same.
I think outside of LSU. When it comes down to TCU and Washington, I still think I give the nod to Washington over TCU, given its tradition as a Power 5 program, as a recent playoff school, and a place that we know has recruited very, very well in the past and built itself into seemingly very close to being a national power. So I would give the edge to Washington at number 3. Does that work for you?
Washington against TCU and Virginia Tech?
Yeah.
I would take TCU over Washington. And I think it's a path thing. I'm not positive on it. I could go back and forth. Washington has had one good coach it's the same thing on a certain level. Don James was obviously excellent a long, long time ago. But TCU and the proximity to talent is increased over Washington. Also, the path to a big bowl in what the new look Big 12 will be. So that's no Oklahoma in your way. Oklahoma State and Baylor are good programs. Cincinnati, BYU, all of these are good programs. But in terms of building a sustainable mountaintop of a program, TCU seems better positioned. They don't have Oregon in its way the same way Washington does. A serious recruiting and winning powerhouse who's now won the conference 2 years in a row and is recruiting in a way that hasn't been seen in the conference since the heyday of USC, or USC at all, and USC's down, but certainly not the Pac-12 North. So the path of TCU, I think, offers a little bit less resistance than Washington's does.
I think that's fair. And you could very easily talk me into TCU. So if we assume LSU 1, USC 2, we'll say TCU 3 for the purposes of argument, and Washington 4. That leaves us with Virginia Tech 5, and I think Washington State 6. Now let's talk a little bit about these positions.
Yeah.
Virginia Tech just opened up very recently.
Yep.
Tuesday morning, November the 16th, word broke from the Virginia Tech athletic department that they were not going to be parting ways immediately with Justin Fuente. There have been some names that have already been rumored for that job. Frankly, it's still a little early to speculate as to where that might go next. But Virginia Tech, much like Washington State, is a very specific job. Virginia Tech, though, does have a lot more recent tradition. for being a really good program.
Sure.
A top flight program. They also, I think, to your point from the TCU and Washington debate, Virginia Tech has a path of least resistance that they could offer any kind of coach.
Yep.
Sure, they're in the same department as Clemson, but they're on a different side.
Yes.
Right. And I think they are very accustomed in Blacksburg to winning that side of the ACC.
Sure.
I think they have that to offer. They also have Lane Stadium. They have, I think, a very rich talent bed that they can use to help build that program up for whoever steps in there next. Washington State is very specific. Part of the reason why the Mike Leach thing for a while seemed like it was sheer brilliance was because you could make the case that Washington State's a lot like Texas Tech. Sort of in the middle of nowhere, Pullman, a very specific job. It does take a special kind of character to go and recruit and win there. Maybe a different kind of system than what you might see elsewhere. So I think that makes it harder. That makes it more challenging, which is why I probably put Virginia Tech over Washington State for sure.
The appeal to Washington State is, I think there's going to be, as long as there's recruiting and the show of competitive force, that there's going to be patience. There's the expectation is you don't have to win 9 or 10 games every year in Pullman. But if you're hitting the portal hard, if you're competitive on the West Coast and you're recruiting to a very specific system and you can point to a very specific kind of recruit, right? If you're running a power offense, you're loading up on offensive linemen. If you're running the air raid, you're loading up on receivers, right? I think there has to be a very deliberate intention to how Washington State is run because it's a program that has won games. Like I fear that we're coming off like we're saying that it's a podunk program in the middle of nowhere that should just be happy to win a bowl game. That's not true because you can win Pac-12 games. You can win games on the West Coast. You can win 8-9 games in most years at Washington State. It takes a very specific person and probably system and probably recruiting strategy, but it can be done. I just think it's an interesting challenge. And I think there is something to be said about the fact that I think the administration will be relatively patient, especially coming off of a tenure of 1 point whatever years from Nick Rolovich, that they just want stability. They just want somebody that they can count on, that there's something dependable there in Pullman. So I think Virginia Tech is a better job because of proximity to talent, and I know the AD, Whit Babcock, is well thought of as somebody to work with, and the Justin Fuente time, I think, was marred by inconsistency, right? It's 3 different recruiting directors. It's, keeping Bud Foster, then transitioning to a new defensive coordinator, all the quarterback upheaval, Ryan Willis and Quincy Patterson and Hendon Hooker and Braxton Burmeister and Jared Evans. And by the way,
it's also following a legend.
Yes, totally.
It's very difficult to follow a legend like Frank Beamer. Mm-hmm. Many coaches have been put in that situation, good coaches over the course of time. Yep. And they have fallen short of expectations. It's really hard to follow a guy like that.
Yeah, it totally is. And by the way, just because we both now mentioned what are the obstacles within a division to get to a championship game, to potentially get that big bowl appearance where, it's great for recruiting, it's great for your bottom line, it's great for the conference's bottom line. USC does not have a serious path in front of it, right? I mean, we have UCLA as an unserious recruiting school. We have ASU, who looks like probably sooner rather than later is going to be moving on from Herm Edwards. So that's starting over again from square one. Arizona's far away. Colorado's relatively far away. And Utah, while good and dependable, I think they have a set ceiling, and I'm not positive how long Kyle Whittingham's going to be in Salt Lake. He's been there forever and ever and ever. So USC, and it's difficult to talk about the Trojans just thinking locally because they, the fan base in the school envisions itself as a national power. But, walk before you can run, and they should be able to jog into the Pac-12 championship game basically every year. And I think it's a big selling point for USC ahead of a school like LSU. Now, I still have LSU ahead of USC, but I get that path matters for sure.
Path absolutely matters, especially if you're a head football coach and you're not looking to get fired in 3 years.
Right. All that stuff USC has proven it will not rush to fire you.
It will not. No. Clay Helton, by the way, caught on with Georgia Southern, correct. Another opening. So look, here's where we stand. We've got LSU 1, USC 2. We've got TCU 3, Washington 4, Virginia Tech 5, and Washington State 6. Those are the 6 openings at time of recording. There will be more, which means we will have more videos. In the comments down below, argue with us. Let us know where we're right. Let us know where we're wrong.
Politely engage. No, you can say whatever you want. Yeah.
In either case, make sure you subscribe to the YouTube channel. Hit the bell so that you're notified of all of our new content. And if you're in the market for a college football podcast, just click on the link down below to subscribe to the Solid Rebel right now on Apple, Spotify, or Google.